Hello and welcome to In the Art Scene podcast, a place where creatives share their stories. My name is Galina Marquez, and I have another cool story prepared for you today, so let's get to it. Hello everybody and welcome back to In the Art Scene podcast, and guess what? Yes, there is another special guest today, and this time I'm actually going to read her bio from her website because it's quite a list. Annie Buckley is a multidisciplinary artist and writer with an emphasis on art and social justice, and the founder and director of Prison Arts Collecti. She's a professor in the School of Art and Design at San Diego State University and the first director of the San Diego State University Institute for the Arts, Humanities, and Social Justice. I hope I did not miss anything. So now I am bringing you to the scene. Annie, welcome to In the Art Scene podcast. Please introduce yourself in your words.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Galina, for having me. I'm looking forward to just chit-chatting and talking more about art. I don't really have anything to add. I've been an artist for my whole life, as long as I can remember. And most recently, the work is more focused on the community-based project, which is so exciting as well. And I just work in a lot of different media.
I knew that you were a writer so a little bit of a background. I started volunteering with Prison Arts Collecti exactly a year ago. So yeah, the summer of 2021. And then I shamelessly dropped off because I was pregnant and it became a little overwhelming.
We 100% understand. We're so happy for you to come back whenever you're ready.
But yeah, I will. Absolutely, I will, because I'm just in awe of this project. But I wanted to start a little bit from the beginning, from you, how you I did not know that you were a visual artist as well. I knew that you were a writer. And then I looked at your website and you have quite a collection. I can tell you my favorite were the love stories. They're so adorable. Oh my God.
I'm so glad you like them. You know, it's so funny because today I was meeting with a colleague on campus and she showed me this video of her daughter's wedding and she kept saying, "Oh, you don't have to watch the whole thing." I'm like, no. It was like 10 minutes. I was like, I definitely want to. Like, I love those kinds of things. And that project was really fun to research.
It's how are they made? They look very sculptural, and at the same time, it's a poetry and it's a visual art all together. And if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, go to anniebuckley.com, and I'll leave the link in the show notes for sure. You should check it out. So
Thank you.
How did you make them?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, I let up a little bit about the research, but my idea, I oftentimes am interested in working with text and image, and primarily text and photo, because that's like the most predominant image form that I use. And I never really think it's ever done like completely effectively. So it's always feels like a challenge, a good challenge, because I'm not sure if I'll ever actually meet it, because I don't necessarily know that anyone has, because it's really hard to merge those two effectively, I think, and not have it just be like descriptive of one another. So in this case, I wanted to make a piece or a series of pieces about love, and thinking about love as both an interpersonal and a universal concept. I think that sometimes it's like we get used to, as artists, making art about like the struggle, and I've certainly done that, and about like the difficult things, but I wanted to try to make it about this like really expansive basic thing of love. So I decided to come up with 3 characters: one, and love. So they're just 2 ones and love. So it was just a gender-free characters. And then I set myself the task of trying to create as many endings as possible to the sentence, "They met, fell in love, and then what happened?" So to do that, like, of course, there's endless amount of stories. Like, every single love story is unique, but at the same time, I think there are commonalities. So I started doing all this research, which was so fun. I would read like the New York Times wedding section, and I would talk to my friends and my family, and just reach out on Facebook or what have you. And I just started collecting stories. And it seemed to me that the 5 presented in this series are pretty much encapsulate like everything that I've seen that could happen, even though, of course, there's specifics in each one. And so I came up with the stories, and then I wanted to create them out of photographs of the sky. So I took photos of the sky on a particular day for each story. And so some were cloudy and some had birds and some were like more with pink accents in the sky. And then once I had the sky photos, I cut the letters out of the sky photos and then encased them in plexiglass. So when they hang on the wall, they're kind of suspended.
I was wondering because they look very sculptural, and I couldn't figure out because I saw those variations of color, and I was like, is it a glare? Are they cut from metal or something, or like almost like a mirror effect or something like that? So, yeah, absolutely adorable. And the stories, you know what it reminded me of? Hemingway, The Shortest Story of Six Words. Remember that one?
Yes, with the baby shoes.
Yes. Yeah, baby shoes for
Yes.
sale, never worn.
Oh,
So
I
those,
love that reference. It's a beautiful reference.
yeah,
Thank
so your
you.
love stories definitely reminded me of that because you really in just a few words encapsulated like the whole like a big chunk of someone's life, a very significant one. So yeah, it's
It's super
awesome.
interesting showing them and having different people kind of go, oh, I see myself in this one or this one, or, and no one has said, I've asked people, like, is there one missing? And no one has really come up with
No,
another one.
I couldn't. Yeah, I feel like yeah, pretty much the entire statistics of the at least
Of
western
love.
part of the world population.
Yeah, well, I know that's true. I wonder how much it would vary to go beyond. That would be such a cool project.
So you always wanted to be an artist when you were a kid, or you were thinking because even in this series of the love stories, it's a, it is a visual art, but it's started with writing. So I love how those two mediums are very very much merged in your style, and I know that you are an author of multiple nonfiction and fiction books and tons of different articles. um, Again, I will put all the links on Amazon and everything, and you can find everything on Annie's website. But I wanted to ask you, what came first, or was it always an equal desire for you to become a visual artist and a writer at the same time?
That is a great question. It's so interesting because as a kid, I always was making things. And it was usually like little stories and pictures. And it always kind of used both arts and writing. But I never thought, oh, I want to be an artist or I want to be a writer until probably like after grad school. Like it took me a really long time to ever acknowledge that I could be that in the world. And I think sometimes people do experience that where they're like, oh, I couldn't be that, or that's not for me. So I definitely didn't picture myself doing that, even though that's all I've done for as long as I can remember. So my sister actually reminded me that I had this drawer in our desk that was just stuffed with these little like cartoons and drawings and little books and all this stuff that I would just make and like throw in there. And I thought it was so funny when she told me that, because I still will like make something and then just like put it away. Like I never really look at it again unless I like show it or talk about it. So they really came simultaneous, and I did primarily art for a long time, but integrated writing. And I studied art at UC Berkeley, and then when I got out, I was a teacher for a while, bilingual teacher in LA, and I kept making art and had my own studio. And I didn't do a lot of writing at that time. But after I went back to grad school at Otis to get my MFA, then after that, I really started writing. And it was primarily with art writing. I just really felt like I learned so much about what was happening in contemporary art. And I felt like, I think a good impetus for writers is feeling like something's missing, or like the dialogue needs something else, and going, I'm going to be that voice. And that is really what inspired me. And so I did do a lot of writing about art, which I absolutely love. But I haven't done as much of it recently. I do more like catalog essays here and there, which is always really enjoyable. But I did like really significant art writing for about 7 years. So they were pretty, yeah, I guess that's so my brother is a writer. So I think growing up and in college and in my 20s, I always felt like, oh, well, he's the writer, so I won't do that. Like, I'll do this
that's a lot is taken already.
Yeah. So I think that like kind of stalled that part. but it's fine. He's so supportive, and yeah, it's funny.
You
Funny how I think kids do that sometimes.
you mentioned you were bilingual. You were a bilingual teacher. What's your second language?
Spanish.
Spanish. Okay.
Yeah, right when I graduated from college, I was an artist and just needed to have a job, and I had done some teaching, and I applied to be a substitute teacher. But because I spoke Spanish at that time, they needed Spanish-speaking teachers, and so they hired me like right out of college. And I didn't have my credential at the time. I got it while I was teaching, but that was just an amazing experience because you're like right at school. Wait, now I'm the teacher of these third graders.
And were
So
you
I learned
always
a lot.
art teacher? You were always an art teacher?
No, I started as just a regular third grade teacher.
Oh, okay.
And then I did have the opportunity to be the art teacher at that school for a couple of years before I left and went back to grad.
All right. So, well, actually, I wonder those third graders, how because I bet that you probably incorporated lots of creativity into your teaching. I wonder if you met those kids today, what they have become.
I would love to. I mean, who knows, right? I don't know. That would be so amazing. And I don't know if any of them integrated arts or anything, but we definitely put it in the classroom a lot, probably more than the average third grade class.
All right. All right. You can say right here, right now, what school, what year, and we will call them out.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it was Hoover Street School in the 90s.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
if any of you students are out there.
So you guys, the class of Annie Buckley, show of hands in the comments.
That would be wild. I did run into one former student once swimming at a pool in the Echo Park.
That's funny. All right. So now the main question and the main topic of today's episode. How did you become passionate about social justice and eventually founded Prison Arts Collective?
Yeah, sure. So thank you. It actually relates. It's interesting. We went on that little side trail down the teaching, but it definitely, all of that leads up to it because, I had always been making art and creating art and studying art. And then when I started teaching, I noticed I was at a school in the Pico Union area of Los Angeles, and it tends to be like a very high population of immigrants from Mexico and El Salvador at that time, and a lot of low income families. And the particular school really didn't have, well, actually, not just my school, but almost all of LA Unified and most schools in low income areas really didn't have the arts. So I noticed that, and I was really lucky enough to actually make a shift in that because while I was teaching, there was something came down from the state that shifted class size and allowed teachers of upper grades to request something different. So I went in and proposed art and they accepted it. So I did teach just art for a couple of years. But all that being said, I noticed throughout that, and then as I went on in my career later, I worked at UCLA, teacher education program, and mentored teachers all over the city. And I always noticed how not only the arts, but just creative thinking in general was very much absent from the school curriculum unless teachers specifically wanted to integrate it, right? But it was really on them. It wasn't like mandated by the school system in any particular way. And I just think that's so sad because it's so joyful, as you and probably listeners who are in arts podcast know, like it's such a source of joy and personal transformation, and also just being able to think about your life in a way that you create the life that you want to the extent that any of us can, right? But to be able to imagine something different for yourself, like I think the arts are important for all of that, not just to become an artist. So the fact that it was missing just always felt sad to me. So I thought, well, there's so many problems in the world. I cannot fix them all. None of us can. But one little thing that I can do is help bring arts, to more places that don't have it where they want it. So that's really where I started. And I have done things like that, many times over the years, at a homeless shelter when I was in college and various places to try to do that. But when I was first hired as a faculty member at Cal State San Bernardino, I was working with students that wanted to become art educators. And a lot of them didn't necessarily like they were amazing students and they were so dedicated and so just showed had such passion to become art teachers, but didn't necessarily know like what are the next steps and hadn't really had experience doing that. And so I thought about, well, what if we do something where they get experience teaching art and then the community gets some art? So it was just a sort of simple community-based art, which other faculty and other teachers across different parts of the country do. And so I set it up together with colleagues and folks in the community that helped make this happen. And we had our students teaching in the community. And it was just so successful and so positive because the students would say, oh my gosh, I learned so much here, like more than all of the reading and books and curriculum. And they just loved working with the students. And many of them wanted to stay on and volunteer. And the community with places that we partnered with also were really happy to have the classes. So somewhere along that time period, the prison in Chino also reached out, which in retrospect I learned like never happened.
Yeah, I'm surprised.
Right?
Yeah, because my next question would be, how did you approach them? Because that must have been, just ridiculous paperwork and going through all the steps of bureaucracy and everything. Okay, I'm sorry, continue.
No, please. No, that's actually exactly right, that there is a lot of paperwork and steps to go inside. So this was just sort of a unique collision of forces that I feel really happy that, or lucky that we had happen. And so like, long story short, after they reached out, me and some of my students and some of my colleagues went over, our department chair at the time, and we went over to the prison and we met the warden and we met some of our future participants. And we were all just really blown away by their hunger for learning and how much they wanted to have the classes, and also how much they had felt that like programs weren't always consistent, which I now know why, because it's hard to keep going and sometimes you have no choice. But in this case, we decided, well, let's just set up a short time frame so that we could finish what we start. And we began teaching in the prison there. And then it was like an 8-week program, but it just went on and on and on. We go there every Friday, still to that same prison. And I've also evolved to other ones. So I guess like this idea of art and social justice has, like, the language for it came after the practice of it and the impetus for it, which has just always been part of my life. And then how it played out was really a combination of like seeing what was happening in our communities and then trying to be responsive to that. And then at the same time, like what came my way or came into my life. I always feel like there's sort of this back and forth. I didn't like set out, I'm going to start this, statewide program. It more so evolved, but now that it is pretty fully functioning program, and there's so many people involved, we're making more clear kind of guidelines of how we want to expand.
Well, just to give our listeners an idea of the scale of Prison Arts Collective, how many universities and how many sites, meaning how many prisons, are involved in this right now?
So our mission is to expand access to the transformative power of the arts to people who are incarcerated. And we're very collaborative, as you know, because you've been involved. We have lots of people involved across many levels. We have had over 5,000, I think it's about 5,600, but I haven't checked exactly, but definitely over 5,000 people who've been in the programs for the past 9 years. And we're currently at, I believe it's 12, it might be 11 now, but state prisons. And within the prisons, there's different facilities. So we're on about 18, I think it is 12. Anyway, sometimes it fluctuates. About 18 different yards or facilities within those prisons. And we have, I'm currently now at San Diego State University, where I've been since 2019. And so we're based here now. Prison Arts Collective is now based here. And we still collaborate with Cal State San Bernardino. And also we have a chapter at Cal State Fullerton and at Cal Poly Humboldt. And I'm sure I'm like forgetting someone, so I hope not. But we definitely have like also sort of tangential relationships with other colleges, and UC Irvine is deeply involved in various aspects, but not within the teaching. And
amazing. This is amazing. So I can see how it snowballed from the initial success with that first person that reached out to you directly. But I also know that there's not only like I love the motto that you have on your website and Prison Arts Collective, that art is a human rights. But you also created the whole research program behind this, right?
Yeah, definitely in collaboration with colleagues from Cal State San Bernardino primarily. Yeah.
Can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about the research, or is it classified?
No, it's not classified, but we don't have like a lot of results to share yet. But so we are looking at the impact of the arts on the wellness and well-being of people who are incarcerated and incarcerated communities. Initially, it was really just about like coming more at it as a teacher. I was just more looking at like, okay, what did they learn, and was it successful that they met our learning goals, and what else did they want to learn? And that is really the only purpose of sort of the surveys in the beginning. But because of the particular population, and it's a sensitive population, and of course for very good reason, there's a lot of regulations around doing any kinds of surveys or looking at any types of measurements. So we did go ahead and get approval through the state research board, the IRB. And so once we did, and so I worked with Dr. Nika Anderson and now Dr. Brian Heisterkamp, and we have several other faculty who are involved who helped with that process. And since we had to kind of go through all of that process anyway, we wanted to also look at some further aspect. And so that's what we're looking at right now. And I have co-written a chapter about that with Dr. Anderson. And then separate from the more academic and research-based writing, which isn't like in my wheelhouse as an artist with an MFA, but it is my degree, right? I didn't study all of that in school. I've learned a lot, and I really let them, take a lead on that. But I myself, as a writer, have been writing quite a bit about the work in a column that I have on Los Angeles Review of Books, and it's called Art Inside. And so there I get to just more explore like the themes and ideas and experience of teaching there, which is a little bit like a different kind of research project.
So how long is this research has been going on, and how long do you intend this? I mean, this probably will be continuous, but like, do you know the threshold when you are expecting the first results that you can actually, I don't know, you probably have an idea what you're going to do with the results.
Well, I really would leave most of that to the research team because they're really like taking the lead on that. And for me, it's more so about the writing aspect, which I do write about it. And I'm actually at work on a book link work about it as well, like sort of taking the ideas of the columns and turning it into a book, which I've been working on for about 4 years. So we'll see how close it is to fruition or where that goes. But I'm more focused on that aspect and also the exhibitions that we do with the work. And those are all part of the research. So that's more my aspect of it. And but I do know that the research team is looking at, trying to do a scholarly article quite in the coming months, as well as like conference presentations. And we do have the one article out in a book published by Spain, a chapter that talks about, what we have noticed so far and how much primarily what we have seen has to do with the impact on, individuals' self-concept and understanding of themselves, and also their emotional well-being and things like that.
I also know that you have a program for formerly incarcerated people, right? So,
we're just starting that. It's like in a nascent stage, but we have done some workshops and we are going to be starting some new ones in the fall. We just got a grant to do that starting in the fall. And so what happened was that as people begin to get out, which is great, of course, it would be great if there wasn't even, a lot of need for us because the prison population just shrank. But being what it is, there's still a lot of need for us. But as people will get out, they will reach out to me at the university and, say that they're out. And at first I was like, oh my gosh, it was so exciting the very first time that happened. And it always is. And we're so happy for them to find their way in the free world. And we have had the opportunity to hire about 6 former participants after they come out, which is always really special because it benefits our project by helping us have that lived experience voice in our working in our team through curriculum and planning and everything else. And then it's also just really nice to see that thing come full circle and be able to help provide that aspect of employment. So it's really, I hope, mutually beneficial. So that program is called Project Alice. And one of our board members, Wendy Staggs, who also herself was initially incarcerated and out and doing amazing things and has served on our board, helped name that project. And she was thinking of my mother, who actually passed away right just prior to the pandemic, and had volunteered in juvenile hall for like 20 years. So it was a really big inspiration to me. So as I had told Wendy about her, she said, we should name this Project Alice. And so it's really beautiful recognition of that.
It is beautiful. And I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
I also wanted to ask you, so you have an amazing pool of volunteers. And I thought initially that, there probably will be some local artists, art students from the universities that are participating in the program. But when I joined, I realized how much more spread your hands are, the channels, because there were some people from different countries who were so involved in creating amazing things and helping. And so I wanted to hear a little bit about some of the volunteers from your standpoints, from your point of view. How are they finding you? What are they bringing on? Because I know that there's just, there's an amazing variety and amazing creative freedom within the program. I mean, with all the restrictions that the prison system puts on you. Is that a right word?
Yeah, puts on us. Or imposes.
Imposes, right. You still, you and volunteers and your team are still creating just an amazing variety of creative projects. So
that's so great to hear. Thank you. Sorry, you were.
Yeah, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sure. So I think that, there's different layers of involvement. And I think that's really important because I'm one of those people who kind of wants to like hear from everyone, because I think that we get a richer outcome when we get a variety of perspectives on, and also I think for our participants, they're going to get like the most positive and enriching experience when they can hear from a variety of people as well. So because we're like a university-based arts and corrections program, and for people who don't know, arts and corrections is a program in California, and it's within the California Arts Council and also funded by California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. And they're an amazing program. We're so fortunate to be part of them for the past 6 or 7 years. And so that's really like our primary funder. We have others, but that's our primary one. And so within the Arts and Corrections program, we're, I think, the only university-based one. So it's a little bit unique from some of the other nonprofits. And so I think one thing that's really special is that we can leverage our faculty expertise, our student expertise, and also where they're at learning and their enthusiasm, and in many cases their youth, to like bring new ideas. And we can leverage that together with our volunteers from the community to create a really rich program. So essentially the way that it works is that we have our core programs taught by either faculty or staff or peer facilitators who are trained facilitators who are inside the prison. So I'll speak about that in a second. And then we have like that additional like enrichment by volunteers. So that's kind of the way it works. And the reason it started like that is because originally we were all volunteers for like the first 2 years because we didn't have funding. So everyone volunteered. All my students were getting credit from the university, and then ultimately volunteered, and myself, it was part of my service to the university. So it wasn't until we got funding that it sort of became, oh, okay, well, we'll fund people. But then we still had more people wanting to reach out and help than we could possibly include in the funding. And so initially it was really hard to sort of figure out how to help have them support us. And we would often have people come in as a guest artist and share their art, which was amazing. And people got to learn from someone, the participants got to learn from someone new. And that was like a good way of using their experience in a positive way. And they got to have a positive experience of going inside and teaching. And then during the pandemic, two things happened that I think really exploded our volunteer base, like when we met you and so many of the people you're talking about, like national and international. And that is one of our, she was started as an intern and now works with us. Who we were talking about earlier, Sophie Verdelis, is does communication both with the prisons and also with the public. And she just spread the word in such a way that so many more people came and sought to help us. And then also part of her job was to support volunteers. So all of a sudden we had someone who could actually leverage the volunteer support and like help give them what they needed. And we just didn't have that before. So people would come and we would want them to help and they would want to help, but they would sort of do something and wander on because we just didn't have the bandwidth to support them. So she helped so much with supporting our volunteers and also spreading the word. And I think that's why it's really grown. And we have people like yourself. We're so happy that you joined and, just experienced artists who just want to give back. And both here and as you say, like in Australia and Ireland, in the UK, and some of them are doing, really significant support and projects for us. So it's been really special to see that happen.
That's amazing. I wonder if artists from different countries, like Australia, is quite far away.
I know. And that person is actually going to come and be a visiting fellow. Wow. And he was volunteering for a couple of years remotely. So yeah, he's a faculty member and teacher of prisons.
I wonder if they take that experience and implement something like that in the community where they live locally. Have you heard anything from them in that regard?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the one from Australia, he already teaches in the prisons there and then wanted to learn more about like a collaborative process. And so that's how he found us. And then he did implement some of our Project Alice like techniques that we do with that particular program in his classes. And then we have a volunteer in Ireland who's an art therapist who helped give a workshop, like an online workshop, and worked together with Wendy, who I had mentioned earlier, doing a workshop. So I don't know, like that anyone has taken it and started something similar because some were already doing it and some are sort of starting out. So it'll be interesting to see, where that evolves. We have a lot of folks also nationally who've reached out and possibly want to collaborate or share ideas. And so it's been a time of, in one sense, isolation, as many of us know now, right? Yeah, but in another sense, like connection in a different way.
Yeah, that was an amazing experience. The past couple of years, so many things have shut down, but so many doors open at the same time.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
Let's take a short coffee break. This podcast is the passion project that I produce and finance myself. If you want to support the show, you are welcome to volunteer, but the easier way is to just buy me a coffee. There's a link for it in the show notes and on our website, intheartscene.com. Thank you for your support. Hey listeners, did I tell you that we have fun merch? Well, we do. Click shop on our website and check it out. We have tees and hoodies, coffee mugs for your paint water, and my personal favorite, a studio apron. We use fun quotes from real artists, our podcast guests. And the best thing is all items are customizable, so get creative. By purchasing the merch, not only do you support the production of this podcast, but you also help us support art-related nonprofits and community organizations. Thank you for your support. So I have gone through the teacher's training with you. It took me a couple months.
That's okay.
I have learned that there are so many very so many nuances, and some of them are due to a very strict bureaucracy in prisons. Some of them are very because it's kind of, sensitive topics. Certain behaviors are not allowed, or there's so much going into being a teacher inside prison, from how you look and you present yourself to what you can teach, and even limitations in supplies that you can bring. So if you can talk a little bit about that, or if you can describe like the biggest challenge in that regard, like especially the biggest creative challenge that you and your team have faced, uh, that would be, I think, very interesting to know. Because I was really, really blown away when I was going through the teacher's training, and let alone the certification that would let me inside the prison, which I did not finish.
I know it's very long. It's not for the faint of heart or
Oh my
the
God.
afraid of work people.
Sure.
It's very, yeah, it's so true. That's so funny. I love hearing from you. Like when usually, people ask about it, you kind of have to explain more starting fresh, but you're part of the team and you've already gone through this, so that's such a, like you kind of explained it all in your question, and that's exactly right. For folks listening, it's definitely a process. It's not like I kind of made it simple, like, oh, they wanted art program and we came over and then we started one. There's so much more involved. And it's they have the prisons are there for their security, and so they have that's their, like, putting their hat on, that's their role, right? And so we have to work within whatever their guidelines are, because basically if we don't do it. So there's not like a choice. You kind of have to do that or not teach inside there. And we definitely have seen in all of our time, I say we because so many of our team shares this, but just speaking for myself, I've seen so clearly that there's such a hunger and such a desire and such a need to have this bright light of just making something and just taking a moment to like think about, how do I feel and how might I express that? Like for people who are just really under stress 24/7, it can be like, I don't want to speak for them, but I know myself, it has been life-changing and life-saving, and I have never been in prison. So for people who are in that state, it just can be such a powerful experience. So we do, want to continue. I do all of the things needed. But that being said, it's definitely not like a simple, easy thing where you just sign up and go. That's why we do ask, that both, students as well as volunteers, as well as staff, work with us for a while before they even start that process, because it's important to understand what it is and why you're doing it before diving in. So yeah, there's many restrictions, from the very long clearance forms to the learning, what clothing is allowed, and what topics there. It's what materials are allowed. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like a good example to share. And one thing I'll say is that from the beginning, I noticed that there are so many people who are incarcerated who are already practicing artists. So they maybe don't see themselves as that. They are, and they will often come to see themselves as that as we talk it through. And they most typically do like a very realistic style of art that's seen and admired and is amazing. And honestly, on the outside, a lot of people don't do that very often anymore. So it's quite compelling. So what I noticed from the beginning is to like recognize and value that, and then say, okay, like let's show you other things too, for people who maybe don't want to go that way or who want to learn something else. And for those who are newer to the classes, they would just be like, oh, I can't do that, right? Because they hadn't. And so we wanted everyone to feel included. And we also want to show them that there's a whole big world of art out there that they're part of. So we will always introduce different types of art in our classes, just all throughout art history, not in sort of a chronological way per se, but more so in relationship to creating art. So learning about, like, say, surrealism or op art or installation art, or once I walked in and one of my graduate students at the time was teaching a class, and they were seated they were all seated around his table. We usually have a few different classes going on at the same time, right? And we had like drawing over here and painting there and yoga in the corner. And he was doing a class on, I don't remember the topic, but he, at that time, for a very brief moment in time, they allowed us to have a computer and projector. That's not normal. We can't do that anymore. I don't know how we got that. And he was showing about institutional critique, that approach to art. And I just thought, this is fascinating. Like, I'm in a prison looking at these men learning about the art of critiquing institutions. And it was so fascinating. And it was just like it was an interesting moment. But I think that's just an example of how we just try to open their eyes to different types of art. And then in terms of materials, it just depends on each institution what they allow, but most often we are allowed to bring like colored pencils and paper and paint and brushes. We're very limited on any kind of three-dimensional forms. We do sometimes poetry or creative writing. I didn't really speak a lot about it, but one of our core programs is called the Facilitator Training Program. And in that program, so I first led it together with several students, and now other faculty and teachers have led it. But it's a teacher training inside the prison. So sort of like going full circle, fusing some of those experiences I shared earlier about teaching and doing teacher education with the arts, and then seeing all these people with arts experience saying, you know what, let's just add that little piece of the teaching element, and then they can lead these classes and be empowered and become leaders and mentors. And it's been so amazing to see. We have so many amazing teachers in our program who are currently incarcerated peer facilitators. And some of them expanded our curriculum too by teaching music, by teaching singing. You have a gentleman teaching traditional Mexican music at a prison in Fresno. And we had some men who created a class about creative writing and making amends. And so that was a really interesting merging with like rehabilitative programming.
Fascinating. It's just, yeah, it's just fantastic. Can you think of an example of some like one of the most unusual creative class that have ever been introduced in the program?
That is such a good question, because one thing that's really cool is our curriculum is based on an integrated art model where we have art history, art making, some type of reflection, but to tell you, I'm like, but reminding just as our audience know. So art history, art making, some type of reflection or discussion, and then also the cultivation of a safe space, which we added to that traditional kind of 3. And so we ask for that, but then within that, we give the teachers, a lot of freedom and hope that they also ask our participants, what do you want? So that it's a responsive type of teaching that is in relationship to what people are interested in and what someone has to offer. So we've had so many amazing classes. It's so hard to say. I guess like one that I think is really cool, it was a student of mine at Cal State San Bernardino who created this lesson. And he was a printmaker, and he wanted to teach with us in the prison. And, he went through we have a class associated with it. So they learn about teaching and about the prison and arts and corrections, and then they start teaching. And we do that at a few of the universities now. So he wanted to teach printmaking. He gave us his material list, and like everything got rejected just out of hand. Like, no, you can't bring any of that. It was like the rollers and the brayers and like the plexi sheets and the ink, the carving, like to carve the linoleum, it all just got rejected. So he was at first a little disheartened, and then he said, okay, well, let me try again. So he just came up with this very creative printmaking curriculum and ultimately did create it, and it's on our curriculum archive, and he taught it, and it was so well received. And he used like an embroidery hoop and like resist methods and just different types of methods that use simple materials like styrofoam and a pencil that we were allowed to bring. So I thought that was a really great innovative example.
Wow. Well, that's definitely pushing artists who want to become teachers out of their comfort zones, because being a printmaker and like you learn and you practice your craft in the way that you are doing it, and then all of a sudden you need to throw all of that away, come up with a totally different solution within very, very limited allowances. And yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome.
That is such a great like summation. And I think for some people they could see it as like limiting because even there's certain art we can't bring in, like you can't bring in art with violence or with nudity. And some people are like, that's censorship. And it's like, it is, but us not going at all is much greater censorship. So we work within to see like how much we can do within these boundaries, which I think is an interesting challenge. But if
Oh
people
yeah.
don't like that kind of thing, it's definitely
You were talking
hard.
about printmaking, and it reminded me there's a woman I am following on Instagram. She is a printmaker, and she seems to be making prints off of anything. I mean, she does have a brayer and ink and everything, but she literally just grabs anything that she has. Like she was making patterns with corn cobs and
So cool.
sliced oranges and just any like a glass carved glass dish or like a vase. She would braid and roll it on the
That
surface.
sounds
Yeah,
so
it's really
cool.
amazing. Yeah, I'll share her account with you. Maybe you can get some ideas for sure.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's the thing. That's so cool that you share that. Yeah, I'd love to see it. And I think like one thing I've learned too is for the artists and they're not all visual artists, but those working in our programs and teaching our programs who are incarcerated are so resilient and so creative. So that also really inspires me. So when we're like, oh, can't bring, this particular image, or someone will say like, well, this part is half a page of this curriculum is not allowed. Like, instead of going, oh my gosh, why can't we bring that half page? It's like, okay, well, let's do what we can with like the other 40 pages. And I think that our folks we work with inside really inspire me with that because they're so resilient. They're so able to find joy and light within such dark and isolating situation, that it really makes me say, okay, yeah, so let's do what we can and it's going to be amazing. And we do a lot with that, as as opposed to like looking at the lack or looking at the what's disallowed. And they also are really creative with materials, so we're able to bring in a lot compared to what many of them have. But even so with what they have, like I know artists who, one of our former participants who's now out and is actually recently taught a workshop with us, Tony, he had created a series of paintings using coffee when he was in
Hmm.
isolation, and that was all that he had. And so making a handmade brush from little types of hairs on the ground and using the coffee and making these paintings of Obama that are just stunning. So
Amazing.
examples like that are, and there's many, many examples of just the creative materiality that they can come up with when faced with so little. So for us to be able to bring, acrylic paints and make murals and all this, like compared to what they already have, it's a lot. So I think it's really just perspective, right? Like most things in life and like how we frame it.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of that, that's actually a perfect segue to my next question. I have seen some of the examples. I was lucky enough to help you with some uh, design for the cards and everything, so that allowed me to see some of the examples of the art created inside, and it is just amazing how much talent there is.
I
Uh,
totally agree.
I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about that because you already talked a little bit about people who are already practicing art, and they're going very realistic and mostly pencil drawings, things like that. But there are much more to it, and then people who are just starting with your program, almost immediately showing, I don't know, because there's so much desire, they're so open to it. They show so much talent.
Yeah,
So,
that's so beautiful. I know, I love that. I love those cards that you made for us, and it was
oh,
such a
thank you.
great example. Oh my gosh, your design is amazing. We were so excited when you joined and sent us
Well,
your first samples. We're like, she's amazing.
the whole design is actually the art of the
Well,
participant.
but you did other things for us. I think you did that volunteer thing, didn't you?
I
You
did
did
a
some,
couple of,
you
I did a
did,
couple of
yeah.
design things. Yeah,
They were really, it was really helpful. So yeah, so you saw a lot of the art. No, exactly. There is so much talent and so much desire and so much creativity. The examples that I gave about the realistic and pencil, that is usually like those who are already kind of self-taught inside, and they often do join our classes also, and usually end up being in the facilitator training and teaching others. But many people don't have any arts background and are not self-taught or taught outside. And some do writing, and it's just a wide variety of experiences who come. So we definitely try to make the classes inclusive and make them have those four elements and be accessible to anyone who might be in the class. So whether there's somebody who does have some drawing or what have you, or who doesn't, to make that class accessible to them. And so definitely you see so many different types of artwork created because of the different classes that we offer. So yeah, I would totally agree. It's pretty special to see the different pieces that they make, even though I always say, like, to me, the process is over product. Like, it's all about the process, and it's not really about the result. But for many of them, they care deeply about the result. So it's not nothing. It's not meaningless. And to your point, it's so beautiful. And we have made several exhibitions really in response to their requests, like different participants across multiple prisons saying, we want you to show our art to the community. We want people to see that we're not all bad and evil. They have a strong desire to shift the stereotypes that many people in our society have about those who are incarcerated. And so we did start doing exhibitions, which volunteers often help with those as well, because that's not necessarily something that we have funding to do. So we have made an effort to exhibit the work that they entrust us with for that particular reason, to start to shift those stereotypes.
Did you find the response in the community when you did those exhibitions? What was the response?
It's so varied. Our most recent one was at Santa Monica College, and which was really a great experience because a lot of their students went, and we collaborated with the director there, Emily, and she had a vision for integrating different community groups and students into the exhibition, which was such a nice match with what we do. So at that, it was, we got to have more interaction and hear the results, and people seemed to be really thrilled and quite blown away. The other exhibitions, we have had a number over the years, that's just the most recent one, but the ones at colleges and universities tend to have a little bit more either interaction or that we actually get to hear the results because we're talking with the students or we're talking with the guests. I don't necessarily know, the way the visual art is unless you're in the room interacting with people. You don't necessarily know the result. So that's really an interesting question. It makes me think next time we do a show, we should have some kind of like feedback form or something like that, because it would be interesting to know, well, did it shift people's minds like many of the artists were hoping?
Well, next time you do that, let me know and we will do a follow-up interview.
Oh my gosh, there you go. That's so perfect.
I know that you also have your own podcast.
So Prison Arts Collective does. Yes. Yeah, I personally don't, but our program does.
Prison Arts Collective.
Yeah. Prison Arts Collective does. Outside Inside Productions. We began it during the pandemic because, like everyone who was teaching in prisons, we had to think of other ways to support those in our classes because we couldn't go. And we did create many distance learning packets. We've sent thousands of packets all across the state of California to those in our program. And so we sent those, but you have to remember, like, the literacy levels and the education levels within the prison population, given the complexities and the systemic injustices of mass incarceration, are different from in general society, and oftentimes less. And so because of that, to really be able to support our participants having this like written packet, and people have to know there's no Zoom class. Like, we had to like write it, mail it, get approval for the entire packet, make sure it was allowed, for the little plastic baggie of pencils, make sure they were allowed, send them in, and then wait like a month or 6 weeks or sometimes 3 months for them to come back and then we would see what they wrote, and then we would have a teacher assigned to write back to them. So it's really tedious process, but we felt it was worth it to do that. We wanted to continue programming, right? So we did the best that we could. And for some people, it was really effective. But for some people, it was just overwhelming to get this big packet of this instructions. And over time, we shifted it and we changed them up, and we did more interactivity and added images and did all kinds of things to make them as engaging as we could. But at the same time, we had a teaching artist, Dan, who had originally been in our very first classes at Chino and helped us evolve the program from day one. And his recommendation was, there are some people with radios, so what if we could do some type of radio show? And I think it was actually one of our volunteers at the time as well, Gabriel, who really got that started. So long story short, we started this podcast, and we have for those who do have access to a radio in the Inland Empire, they can listen. But for everyone, it started to be for people inside, but it ultimately became a lot more for the public in a way, only because there's not that many people who have access to it. So it does play on KSPC 88.7. And they are a partner, and we're so grateful that they support it. And for those in the Inland Empire who have a radio, they can listen to that. But what we're hoping is to have it on more radio stations across the state so that more people within the prisons with radios can listen to it. And then it's also available on Spotify and on Anchor. So hopefully people check it out. It's such an amazing program. We have had wonderful hosts over time, starting with Gabriel and then moving to Ella Turen, who really took a lead, a dear, dear friend and advocate and artist who sadly very recently passed. She took a lead and really helped expand that podcast using her extensive talents as an artist and actress. And now her colleague or her friend who she brought on board, Kathy Foley-Meyer, is the host. And what we do is we interview people who were incarcerated and who have come out and are practicing artists, writers, musicians. So that's really, we hope, inspiring to those inside. But then we've also started interviewing different teachers and facilitators of prison arts programs and people sort of in and around that milieu.
Amazing. And I will make sure to leave the link for the podcast in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
Assuming you are listening to every episode of Inside Outside Radio, what was your favorite story? What was your favorite interviewee?
Oh my gosh. Well, I know a lot of them, so it's impossible for me to say because most of the earlier ones were former students of mine who are now out and are working and are artists. So I'm so proud of all of them. And, just so inspired by them to be able to take such a difficult time of their life and then be able to come out and start fresh. And it's not always simple and easy. I've also heard from former participants who are sadly, struggling in many, many ways. And so I always do my best to refer them to people who do help, like Anti-Recidivism Coalition or Homeboy Industries, and there's many other places, Mass Liberation. So we try to refer them. So I just don't want to paint like a rosy picture, like it's easy. But for those who have made it through and been successful and we're able to interview them, it's just impossible because they're almost all my former, almost all the ones that we've, not all, but many. So I just really recommend listening and literally just like picking one and checking it out, because even like the artists, the teachers, they're also we have like, I think a couple of our board members who've been on it who also are deeply engaged in the work. So I just think that they're also inspiring. I can't pick one.
Okay. All right. Okay, for everybody. I will not torture you any. And I just encourage everybody to go to show notes, check out the podcast, and just binge listen.
Yeah, there you go. Just one thing I wanted to circle back on, and I don't know if we're wrapping up, but this might be close. This might be a good wrap, but if we're not, that's fine too. But something that you mentioned earlier was about our like the idea of art as a human right.
Yes.
And so it's just really resonated with Prison Arts Collecti. It's something that's been really important to me and my practice as well. And it just seems so appropriate to Prison Arts Collecti. I mean, a lot of people respond to it, so we sort of adopted it as our tagline, and we had always said that was part of it. But I want to say a little bit where that came from, because I feel like it.
Sure. Yeah, of
We never
course.
really talk about that, and it just seems like such a good
Oh,
way for
I
people
don't
to
know. To me,
understand.
yeah, it just when I read it, it's like, duh, it makes sense.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I know, right?
Yes.
I know everyone kind of goes, of course, but we don't think that everyone doesn't have that. But I think the reason why it became so prominent in my mind in relationship to Prison Arts Collective is like most everything related, like everything related to our program, is because of those who take part in it. So in the first few times that I was visiting the prison and teaching, and like I said, my mom had done work in juvenile hall, so I had done that before, and it wasn't like but I had not been to a prison until this experience of teaching these classes. One thing that stood out so profoundly to me, and still does, is how often people will say, we feel, we feel human in this class or in this art space. Or you all come and you bring the humanity, or like I think that some variation of that is
Mhm.
repeated many, many times over. And I think that really struck me, because I had never thought about my humanity, to be honest. And I didn't realize like what a privilege it was to not have had to consider that, to just have that be a self-understood thing that I have, my humanity, for whatever that means, right? And so to have that recognition that that is such a privilege to be able to feel and experience that on a daily basis was really mind blowing to me. And I think it's a couple of things. The arts do ask us to be ourselves and to find ourselves and express ourselves, whether individually or communally. And that's not a regular part of a prison, which is much more of like an institutionalized space where things are, we wear the same clothing and you do the same things, and it's almost like anti-individual. So there's that. And then also, I think the second thing is just the interconnection and dialogue and conversation that happens in our classes and in all these prison programs that people bring in. There's an aspect of, and there's so many beautiful ones that I've come to know over the years. So that aspect of interacting with someone in just a sort of conversational way, like we're doing, that isn't someone who's an officer or a peer, that's maybe someone with another experience. I think that's the other thing that brings that in. And the fact that we bring in oftentimes college students, with faculty, I think is really special too, because they're learning and the participants in the prison are learning and everyone's learning together. And I think there's something really like probably fun about them connecting, with students and with faculty, and for the students and faculty as well to connect with this population who's so eager and hungry to learn. So there's just this really like blissful, almost sort of like oasis that happens within the class, even though, of course, it's in a space that is incredibly like the opposite of that on their day-to-day experience.
Yeah, it actually never occurred to me until you just said that we are so privileged to just express who we are and feel like human, because most of us on the outside have never been dehumanized, and we never experience what it is to lose that part about yourself. So yeah, it really never occurred to me.
Yeah. I hadn't
Well, thank you
really
for
thought
bringing it
about
up.
it either. Yeah. You had mentioned it earlier, and we kept going, so I didn't get to mention it. But yeah, I think that it's quite profound. That's sort of what inspired that tagline. To think about that.
On that note, yes, absolutely. So grateful that you brought it up and explained it this way to our listeners, because I think that I had a guest in the first season who I believe I referred to the Outside Inside Radio once, and I had a conversation with her, and she told an amazing story about how it is like the absence of color was one of the most depressing things, and that art kind of kept her sane. And for me, with a degree in psychology, that kind of makes sense. But it really, never even crossed my mind that this part of humanity and self-expression.
Yeah. It's quite profound. And even just thinking about the simple thing of, they have to wear the same clothing, and they have to eat the same food and eat and sleep at the same time. And like just the kinds of things that the many choices we make on a daily basis that they don't have. Like there's something about that I think makes the arts an even more powerful experience, like in comparison. And so that I think is partly also why it's so enjoyable and meaningful for us going in as well, because to be part of that experience is quite powerful. I mean, we're not just bringing it, like we're also experiencing that opportunity to bring that to folks who are not able to experience that regularly.
Yeah, and that's sad. I think pandemic kind of showed us that we are taking art on a daily basis for granted so much. And during pandemic, being in isolation, we really experienced that. We probably would have gone insane if we didn't have movies, if we didn't have, our hobbies, some sort of creative outlets or some sort of entertainment. And people started thinking that, okay, well, art is something that, really deserves recognition. But that is a totally different level, because I remember when my conversation with Tara, that guest from the first season I'm talking about, she even said something that she had to smuggle colored pencils. It was a contraband. So she was risking punishment, but it was so important for her sanity, for her humanity to be expressed that way, that she would take that risk. So, and that really speaks to the importance of art in our lives on a daily basis, which again, we take for granted so much.
I think that's so true. I think that, a lot of us do. I mean, and so it is just really a beautiful thing to recognize. Just to recognize the power of that within like such a kind of like confining space, that you could be open and you could be free in your mind, even though you're not free in your body.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I'm so sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
No.
I was going to wrap it up on this note because with this significant realization, I think we can wrap up this interview. I am so grateful we made it work. I wanted for so long, for a year, I wanted you on this podcast.
Oh my gosh. I'm so happy we were able to too. Absolutely. I know our schedules kept conflicting.
Yeah, so. I know you're so busy, but we absolutely will have some sort of a follow-up, maybe, I don't know, in future seasons sometime. And maybe you can bring someone from the Project Alice.
Yes, for sure. Or to your interest in the research team, like definitely would love them to speak about that, or Project Alice. Yeah, anything that we want to hear, we love it.
Multiple follow-up interviews.
Thank you. We love it. I'm so happy that you're part of PAC and that you found us and we found you. And thank you so much for inviting me. It's been really, really fun and interesting talking with you.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for being in the art scene and doing such an amazing work. Thank you. It has been another episode of In the Art Scene podcast. If you liked today's conversation, please give us a good review on Apple and go listen to other great stories. Check out our website intheartscene.com or follow us on Instagram at intheartscene for more content. If you are a creative and you want to share your story, shoot us a message from the website or DM us on Instagram. Look forward to seeing you next time in the art scene.